Late 1938, San Diego, California. The United States Army Air Corps approaches Consolidated Aircraft with a routine request: build the B-17 Flying Fortress under license like everyone else. Company President Reuben Fleet refuses. He tells the Army his engineers can build something better. Within 7 years, his answer becomes the most produced American military aircraft in history, flying more missions in more theaters than any aircraft the United States ever built. And almost nobody remembers its name the way they remember the bomber. It was built to outdo. Accepting the government's offer to build the Flying Fortress meant guaranteed profits and stable, low-risk work. It was the safe path for a company that had primarily built flying boats. But Reuben Fleet saw a different future. He believed that tying his factory to a competitor's design would permanently relegate his firm to second-tier status. Fleet trusted his engineering team, led by chief designer Isaac Ladden, to deliver an entirely new aircraft that would make the B-17 obsolete. The gamble was immense. If Ladden's team failed to outperform the Boeing design, Consolidated faced financial ruin and the permanent loss of military trust. The Army's requirements were unforgiving: a top speed over 300 miles per hour, an 8,000-pound payload, and a range of 2,200 miles. In January 1939, Ladden officially began work on the internal Model 32 project. This was a direct challenge to the aviation establishment, a battle of engineering philosophies pitting a proven icon against an unbuilt concept. Consolidated was risking its entire corporate existence on a clean sheet of paper, betting that a group of flying boat engineers could redefine land-based heavy bombardment. The coming conflict would test whether Fleet's refusal was a stroke of industrial genius or a fatal mistake. The task of turning Reuben Fleet's bold promise into physical reality fell to Chief Engineer Isaac Macklin Ladden. Known to his colleagues simply as Mac, Ladden had guided Consolidated's engineering division since 1927. His reputation was built on massive, successful flying boats, including the famous PBY Catalina. Designing a land-based heavy bomber meant stepping into completely unfamiliar territory. Under Ladden's direction, the company's San Diego design office officially initiated the project under the internal designation Model 32. Ladden's small engineering team did not have the luxury of time or unlimited resources, and they faced a clean drafting table and a set of exceptionally demanding requirements from the Army Air Corps. To win a production contract, this new aircraft had to fly faster, carry more weight, and travel farther than any heavy bomber currently in service. It was a direct attempt to surpass Boeing's established Flying Fortress, a plane that already possessed a formidable reputation. For Ladden and his engineers, the immediate challenge was defining what better meant in practical terms. They had to balance three competing demands: a top speed exceeding 300 miles per hour, an 8,000-pound payload, and a range of 2,200 miles. Merely copying existing designs would not meet these targets. To achieve such unprecedented performance, the team had to abandon conventional design limits and rethink the entire structure of a heavy bomber. Instead of modifying an existing plane, they launched a completely fresh design program built from the ground up. Ladden's team had to design a fuselage spacious enough for a massive bomb bay, select a landing gear system never before used on an American bomber of this scale, and find a way to minimize aerodynamic drag. Every decision made on the drawing boards in early 1939 was a high-stakes calculation. If Ladden's team failed to outshine the Boeing design, Consolidated faced financial ruin. They were the underdogs, operating in the shadow of a beloved Titan, but they possessed a quiet determination to rewrite the rules of aerial warfare. In 1937, an independent designer named David R. Davis approached Consolidated Aircraft with a radical, unproven wing concept. Davis was not a trained aerodynamicist, and his proposal arrived years before the military issued its formal requirements for a new heavy bomber. He called his concept fluid foil, a thin, high aspect ratio wing that resembled a long, slender blade, contrasting sharply with the thick, drag-heavy structures favored by established builders. To traditional aeronautical engineers, the idea looked like a gamble. A thin wing left little internal space for structural spar supports or fuel bladders. It appeared fragile, prone to catastrophic twisting under combat loads, and highly unstable. While rivals would have dismissed Davis's blueprint as an eccentric theory, Reuben Fleet and Chief Engineer Isaac Ladden saw a potential solution to their speed and range targets. They chose to investigate, directing company aerodynamicist George Scherer to analyze the mathematical claims. Davis's theory relied on an unorthodox teardrop profile designed to generate lift at unusually low angles of attack. By spreading the aircraft's weight across a long, narrow span, the wing promised to drastically reduce the induced drag created by wingtip vortexes. The math was complex and highly controversial, defying the accepted aviation physics of the late 1930s. But for Consolidated, this strange wing became a technical mystery, one that promised to unlock the extreme range and speed demanded by the military, provided they could successfully translate the radical theory into physical aluminum. Consolidated took the radical blueprints to the Guggenheim Aeronautical Laboratory at the California Institute of Technology. Here, inside a 10-foot wind tunnel, the theoretical claims of David Davis faced rigorous scientific scrutiny. Company aerodynamicist George Scherer led the evaluation, mounting a scale model of the thin, blade-like wing into the high-speed airstream. Many in the aviation establishment expected the unorthodox design to fail. Conventional wisdom held that such a narrow, high aspect ratio wing lacked the structural thickness to carry a heavy bomber and would stall dangerously at low speeds. But as the wind tunnel fans roared to life, the measurement instruments recorded a quiet revolution. The data showed the Davis wing performed far better than anyone anticipated, producing 15% less drag and 20% more lift than the thicker wing of the Boeing B-17. In plain terms, the long, narrow shape reduced the air resistance created by wingtip vortexes. By spreading the lift across a wider span, the wing sliced through the air with minimal turbulence. Scherer's testing proved that this shape generated massive lifting force at exceptionally low angles of attack. The aerodynamic efficiency meant the aircraft would require less fuel to stay aloft, directly translating to a massive advantage in range and speed. What began as a doubted, eccentric theory was now a mathematically verified breakthrough. Consolidated had the core of their new bomber ready to move from the wind tunnel to the factory floor. Ladin's team designed the entire Model 32 around this verified shape. To exploit the aerodynamic efficiency of the long, slender blade, they mounted it high on the shoulder of the fuselage, above the aircraft's center of gravity. This placement kept the wing structure clear of the main payload area, allowing the engineers to create a spacious, uninterrupted bomb bay directly beneath the wing root. This structural decision defined the aircraft's operational character. The high aspect ratio wing sliced through the air with far less drag than the broad, thick wing of the Boeing B-17. By committing to this configuration, Consolidated chose range and speed as the performance metrics that would win the war. The thin, long-span design allowed the airframe to carry enormous fuel loads inside the wing itself, removing the need for drag-inducing external tanks on long flights. While Boeing's design focused on high-altitude stability, Consolidated optimized the Model 32 for pure transit efficiency. On paper, the choice was clear: a projected cruise speed of 215 miles per hour compared to the Flying Fortress's 180, and a range exceeding 2,000 miles. This configuration did create a higher wing loading, meaning the aircraft would have a higher stall speed and prove more demanding for pilots during takeoff and landing. But in exchange, Ladin's team had engineered an aircraft that could fly farther and faster than any heavy bomber in existence. The Model 32 had found its identity, built entirely around the wing. On December 29, 1939, less than 11 months after Isaac Ladin's team first put pencil to paper, the physical result of their labor rolled onto the tarmac at San Diego's Lindbergh Field. The B-24 prototype, bearing serial number 39556, was ready to prove whether Consolidated's defiance of the aviation establishment was brilliant engineering or a fatal corporate mistake. Chief Test Pilot William Wheatley climbed into the cockpit, joined by co-pilot George Newman and flight engineers Jack Klein and Bob Keith. As the four Pratt & Whitney engines roared to life, the pressure on Consolidated reached its peak. War was already consuming Europe, and the U.S. Army Air Corps demanded immediate results. Wheatley pushed the throttles forward. The Silver Bomber accelerated, its long, narrow wings slicing through the coastal air, and lifted off into the California sky. The maiden flight lasted just 17 minutes, but it changed everything. Those 17 minutes proved the concept was sound. A team of flying boat engineers had built a high-performance land-based bomber in record time. While the prototype topped out at 273 miles per hour, short of the Army's 300 miles per hour target, Consolidated had deliberately prioritized range over raw speed. The long-range capability promised by Ladin's layout was now a physical reality. Consolidated's high-stakes gamble had left the drawing board and taken flight, establishing a potent new contender in the race for aerial supremacy. The 17-minute flight at Lindbergh Field immediately converted mathematical theory into military interest. The U.S. Army Air Corps quickly placed an order for 7 B-24 service evaluation aircraft, closely followed by 36 production model B-24As. Across the Atlantic, as war loomed over Europe, foreign buyers took notice of Consolidated's design. France and Great Britain placed a combined pre-war order for 284 aircraft, desperate for any machine that could bridge the vast distances of modern conflict. But the flight data also revealed a compromise that would define the aircraft's entire legacy. During tests, the XB-24 prototype maxed out at 273 miles per hour. This was 27 miles per hour slower than the Army's strict 300 miles per hour specification, and slower than the top speeds promised by Boeing's rival. For a conventional design, this speed deficit would have spelled disaster. Yet Consolidated did not panic. Ladin and Fleet chose not to chase those final miles per hour. They knew that the thin, high aspect ratio Davis wing was designed for a different purpose: long-range cruise performance. They deliberately prioritized range over speed, betting that the ability to fly farther with a heavier payload was more valuable than raw velocity. While Boeing focused on low wing loading and steady climbs, Consolidated engineered a machine that could stay aloft longer, carrying more weight across oceans. This calculated trade-off marked the beginning of an industrial paradox. The Liberator's unprecedented range, payload, and eventual production scale would make it the true workhorse of the global Allied air effort, yet it would ultimately remain a footnote in popular memory, overshadowed by the very plane it was designed to surpass. Consolidated built an endurance machine, electing to conquer distance first, setting the stage for a bomber that would do more of the war's actual heavy lifting while receiving far less of the glory. The math favored Consolidated's creation, but the men who flew it used a far more grounded vocabulary. To the crews of the rival Boeing B-17, and often to its own pilots, the B-24 was simply the flying boxcars, or, most telling of all, the old agony wagon. Flying the Liberator was a grueling physical battle. While the Flying Fortress earned praise for its stable, responsive controls, B-24 pilots likened their yoke to steering a heavy truck without power assistance. The thin, high aspect ratio Davis wing, which gave the aircraft its great range and speed at cruise, became a heavy liability at lower velocities. With its high wing loading, the B-24 possessed a stall speed near 100 miles per hour. At low speeds, especially during tight formation flying or landing approaches, the aircraft demanded constant, aggressive muscle. A single moment of pilot fatigue or inattention could trigger a sudden, catastrophic drop. It was far less forgiving of error than the stable, buoyant B-17. Compounding this stress was a lower service ceiling of 28,000 feet, forcing B-24 crews to fly closer to the deadly concentration of German anti-aircraft fire. The Liberator was a cold, demanding workplace that gave its crews no comfort, establishing a reputation as a plane that was highly respected for its capability, but incredibly hard to love. The B-24's service ceiling was limited to 28,000 feet, placing its crews directly in the densest layers of German anti-aircraft fire. By comparison, the Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress could climb to 35,600 feet, slipping above the worst of the flak. This altitude gap was a direct consequence of the B-24's wing design. While the B-17's massive, thick wing offered generous lift at high altitudes, the B-24's thin Davis wing was optimized for low-drag cruise efficiency at lower levels. The thin wing also made the Liberator more vulnerable to battle damage. While the B-17 became legendary for absorbing heavy cannon fire and returning home with shredded wings, the B-24 lacked such structural resilience. Its long, narrow wing spars were packed with fuel, meaning a single direct hit from flak could trigger a catastrophic failure, folding the wing in midair. Yet these limits were the deliberate costs of a conscious design choice. The thin wing sacrificed altitude and structural durability to unlock the extreme range, speed, and payload that the B-17 simply could not match. Consolidated had built a high-efficiency strike machine, accepting that vulnerability was the price of range. The very features that made pilots curse the Liberator in the cockpit were the exact reasons it became indispensable to the global war effort. The thin, high aspect ratio Davis wing demanded constant muscle at low speeds, but at cruising altitude, it carved through the air with 15% less drag than conventional designs. In a conflict fought across the vast expanses of the Atlantic and Pacific, pilot comfort was secondary to raw reach. The B-24 cruised at 215 miles per hour, outpacing the Flying Fortress's 180 miles per hour. It carried a maximum internal payload of 8,000 pounds, nearly doubling the B-17's typical 4,500-pound capacity, and flew those munitions across 3,000 miles. Harder handling did not diminish the aircraft's value, it made it a strategic necessity. While the B-17 was designed for stable formation flying, Consolidated engineered a high-efficiency machine to conquer global distance. The Liberator was built to carry the heaviest burdens of a global conflict, delivering performance where it mattered most. Yet history remains stubbornly indifferent to these numbers. The aircraft that flew farther, carried more, and was built in greater numbers than any other American plane remains in the shadow of the rival it was built to outdo. This vast gap between combat achievement and public memory is a historical puzzle. Understanding the B-24 requires looking at how a nation's memory chose a legendary icon over the ultimate industrial workhorse. Subscribe now to hear the untold story of the Liberator's decisive role in the Allied victory. Popular memory dictates that the Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress was the definitive American heavy bomber of World War II. It is the plane that dominates modern cinema, aviation museums, and the public imagination. But this widely accepted narrative is historically inaccurate. The true backbone of the Allied strategic bombing campaign was an entirely different aircraft, built on a scale that eclipsed its famous rival. That machine was the consolidated B-24 Liberator. While factories built 12,731 Flying Fortresses, they produced a staggering 18,482 Liberators. The B-24 was a primary frontline weapon that completely surpassed the B-17 in every industrial metric. This colossal manufacturing run makes the Liberator the most produced American military aircraft in history. It remains the most produced multi-engine aircraft in the entire history of global aviation, a record that has never been broken. Public memory simply favored a more photogenic rival over the actual workhorse of the war. The B-17 possessed clean, graceful lines that looked magnificent in propaganda reels, whereas the boxy B-24 was built strictly for utilitarian performance. The Liberator flew faster, traveled farther, and carried a heavier bomb load to the targets that determined the outcome of the global conflict. Yet despite these superior metrics, the bomber that did more of the war's work than any other American aircraft is remembered far less than the rival it was built to outdo. The most produced weapon of American air power became its most forgotten. To understand the scale of the B-24's performance, one must look at the hard metrics that defined its daily operations. Both the Liberator and the Flying Fortress required a standard crew of 10 men to fly and fight, with both platforms relying on 4 1,200 horsepower engines to carry their crews into combat. Within these cramped, unpressurized metal shells, the physical realities of the two aircraft diverged sharply. Defensively, later models of the B-24 carried 10 heavy 50 caliber Browning machine guns, distributed across nose, tail, dorsal, and ventral power turrets to ward off enemy fighters. The Flying Fortress countered with up to 13 50 caliber guns. Yet, what the Liberator sacrificed in defensive angles, it clawed back in pure offensive capacity. The B-24's spacious, vertically folding bomb bay could carry a maximum payload of 8,800 pounds. The B-17, limited by its narrower fuselage, typically carried a standard internal bomb load of just 4,500 pounds, only reaching 8,000 pounds on short-range sorties. This payload advantage was paired with unmatched operational range. The Liberator boasted a normal range of roughly 2,100 miles compared to the Flying Fortress's 2,000 miles. This extra radius allowed the B-24 to strike targets deep inside enemy territory that its rival simply could not reach. While the B-17 climbed higher, reaching a ceiling of over 35,000 feet compared to the B-24's 28,000, the Liberator flew faster. It maintained a steady cruise speed of 215 miles per hour, leaving the B-17 behind at 180. The data confirms the design priority. Consolidated built a highly efficient, fast, long-range heavy lifter that outcarried and outpaced the Flying Fortress where it counted most. The industrial scale of the Liberator program matched the global demands of a war fought across vast, unforgiving distances. While the Boeing B-17 remained heavily concentrated in the high-altitude daylight raids over Western Europe, the B-24 became the only Allied bomber to operate from every single continent during the conflict. It was not restricted to a single theater or a single mission. Where other aircraft specialized, the Liberator adapted. In the freezing expanse of the North Atlantic, where the shorter range of the B-17 left a deadly gap for German U-boats to exploit, the B-24 closed the distance. On May 25, 1943, a Liberator completed a 2,500-mile maritime patrol, tracking and sinking U-966. In the Pacific, B-24s routinely bypassed the intermediate refueling stops that other bombers required. In January 1944, they launched a 3,300-mile round-trip strike against Kwajalein, pushing deep into territory the flying fortress simply could not reach. The aircraft's utility extended far beyond dropping ordnance. Modified as the C-87 cargo transport, it carried vital supplies over the treacherous Himalayan hump. Converted into tankers, they hauled millions of gallons of fuel, and in April 1945, naval privateer variants even refueled fighter escorts directly over the Philippines. From high-altitude strategic bombing and photo reconnaissance to anti-submarine warfare and cargo transport, the B-24 did the heavy, unglamorous work of global logistics. The machine that carried the broadest burden of the war was tasked with everything, flew everywhere, and served everyone. Yet this unmatched versatility only distanced it further from the single, iconic role that cemented its rival's fame. When the guns fell silent in 1945, the vast fleets of Liberators were rapidly dismantled, but the pioneering design at the heart of the aircraft endured. The thin, high aspect ratio Davis wing, once dismissed as a fragile gamble, redefined how engineers approached long-distance flight. It proved that lifting efficiency was the true key to conquering global distances. This aerodynamic philosophy directly shaped the next generation of massive long-range platforms. When Convair engineers drew up the B-36 Peacemaker, they designed a high aspect ratio wing spanning 230 feet, applying the same low-drag principles to achieve unprecedented intercontinental reach. The lessons learned from the Liberator's wing also influenced the development of the Lockheed Constitution and the earliest jet transports of the 1950s. High-speed, long-distance logistics required wings that could slice through the air with minimal resistance, a standard the Davis wing mathematically proved on the B-24. The Boeing B-17's thick, conventional wing left no real descendants in post-war commercial or strategic fields. In contrast, the Liberator's thin wing became a technical bridge to modern aviation. It remains a lasting engineering legacy, establishing the B-24 as both a wartime workhorse and a fundamental leap forward in aeronautical science. The physical disappearance of the Liberator sealed its quiet exit from history. Today, only 13 B-24 airframes survive in museums, with just 2 remaining airworthy. In contrast, roughly 50 B-17 flying fortresses are preserved, frequently flying at air shows and cementing their place in public memory. This survivorship gap directly explains why the B-24 has been largely forgotten. While millions can see and hear a flying fortress in flight, the B-24 has vanished from public sight, leaving a physical void that media and film easily filled with the image of its rival. Yet the final chapter of the Liberator's active service did not unfold in America or Europe. In 1947, the newly independent Indian Air Force discovered a collection of abandoned Lend-Lease B-24s at Chakri Airfield in Kanpur. Engineers at Hindustan Aeronautics Limited painstakingly salvaged and rebuilt 42 of these heavy bombers. Flying with number 5, 6, and 16 squadrons, these machines patrolled the subcontinent and served India reliably for 2 decades. When the Indian Air Force retired its last squadron in 1968, the operational history of the B-24 came to a silent end. The bomber that carried the heaviest operational burden of the war was left behind, while its competitor captured the public imagination. The most produced aircraft in American history did the most work and received the least honor. Subscribe now to support the channel and hear more untold military stories. Today, our modern global airspace still relies on the pathways this workhorse pioneered. We inhabit a world built by the heavy lifter that history quietly left behind. The ultimate paradox of the air war remains true. The aircraft that did the most is remembered the least. Its unmatched scale of service guaranteed its anonymity. Subscribe for more untold military history.